Hey, Clemson family. One of the quietest disappointments for the Tigers in 2022 was the play of the defensive ends. We'll take a look back. We'll set the table a little bit for why it leaves so many questions to be answered next year.
I'm Daniel Shirley. We'll also take a look back at Clemson's second straight loss in basketball on Saturday, and we'll get you ready for their trip to Chapel Hill to face the Tar Heels.
I'm Bill Zimmerman. Welcome to everyone joining us on YouTube and the major podcast apps for episode 62 of the Reign Supreme Alway podcast. Follow us on social media too. We are at Clemson Kickoff on Twitter and on Instagram. Let's go ahead and get into the defensive ends last year. That was a room in 2022 that had a chance to take a step forward, even earn a title of being dominant, but just for a variety of reasons, they didn't.
Yeah, I thought this was going to be the kind of the showcase group of the team, maybe with the defensive tackles for sure, but right there with that group. And it just felt like the defensive ends never lived up to that title or that focus of going to be a dominant group, like you said. So I thought KJ Henry was really good. And, I'm excited to see what he can do in the NFL. He was probably the most consistent player in that defensive end group the whole season, maybe on the entire defensive line, because he was in the lineup every game, wasn't out with injuries and those kinds of things. And he really, I thought Bill lived up to what maybe we thought he would be when he signed as a 5-star player. I know people have been waiting for him to do that, but I thought he did that in 2022. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what's next for him.
I would say he was a stalwart up front. He did well pressuring QBs, and at times he was hitting running backs for a loss as well. I'd say sometimes that came at the price of not really setting the edge the way you would have liked to see. Played the most snaps of the group, 659. He had 59 tackles, 9 tackles for loss, and 3.5 sacks. I thought he really had blossomed in 2021, and I was glad to see him keep his level of play very high in 2022. Maybe the second best defensive lineman across that front four, you think, next to Tyler Davis?
Yeah, I think so. At least as far as just overall play, maybe not the most talented or the second most talented. And I think we'll talk about a couple of those guys coming up, but he felt like he got the most out of his season of anybody. And I think that was a big way for him to go out. He showed up during the summer. He was a leader for this group, and then he went out and performed and backed it up with his play. So that was good to see.
And raised some eyebrows at the Senior Bowl as well. So it will be interesting to see just how high he can go in the NFL draft. Maybe it won't even come down to day 3. A lot of differences of opinion on him, and all it takes is one or two teams to really evaluate a guy pretty high. I just don't know what to make of Miles Murphy's season. His junior year, he probably had the most ability in the room. He was solid against the run. That's his trademark. He seems to have still earned top 10 draft standing day one. But to me, he just didn't improve on the pass rush all that notably. He did finish with 6.5 sacks during the year. In 2 games this year, he did not start when he caught some public critiquing, shall we say, from head coach Dabo Swinney. I don't think he was in the love shack entirely.
Yeah, this one's tough, right? Because it feels like he's got first round talent, but I don't think we saw that this season or at all the time. And we saw it some, and I know that even for us at the Athletic, we did a mid-season All-America team, and he was on our team, but it felt like he had kind of padded up his stats in a couple of games and maybe a couple of moments, and then wasn't really consistent. And I thought that was the biggest piece that was missing for him in 2022 was some consistency. And there were some big moments, right? And he would have a couple of games where you go, oh, okay, there it is. That's why everybody's talking about him as a top 10 pick or a first round pick. But then where was that the rest of the season? And I thought that was the biggest issue. Look, he's a good player. From all indications, he was a good teammate. He's a talent, and you wish him well, but it was almost felt like an incomplete with his season in 2022.
45 tackles on the season for Murphy. Maybe that says teams were kind of running away from his side. 580 snaps total, so not as many as Henry. 11 tackles for loss overall for Miles Murphy. Just very up and down, like you said, hot and cold. Pick your cliche and apply it there. I think he's got a ton of talent, potential to be an NFL star, quite frankly. How's he going to put it together? When is he going to put it together? Who's going to connect with him? X's and O's wise, perhaps it's going to be a motivation thing. His opportunity to be a top first round draft pick, guaranteed money, all those things. That's important. And this is a guy who's a really good student as well. I mean, very disciplined as a person. So it just adds to a little bit of the mystery about this season. Be sure to tell us what you think, especially in the comments on YouTube. We want you to be part of the conversation, and we always enjoy seeing your thoughts and replying when we can. Another guy among the defensive ends who I would say was status quo from the previous season would be Justin Maskell. You know, another guy as a recruit out of the Atlanta area, he was highly lauded, just hasn't quite become that household name for Clemson fans. Played capably in several regards last year, didn't quite stand out very often. I can think of a few times where I saw a big play and I'm like, all right, good, let's get him going. Several times also when I'd look up at a big run play by the opposition. I'm not saying he's at fault, but I would see his number on the field. There were some times that setting the edge was a problem when he was in there. He's going to be back this coming year. He will be relied upon for sure. So you hope he does take that big step forward. As Sweeney says, flip the switch, or as one of my favorite bosses used to say, rise to the occasion. Maybe kind of like Kevin Dodd did when he made such a name for himself at the start of Clemson's playoff run.
Bill, I would say solid is the word I would use for Justin. I think he's a good player. I think he's the kind of player you need to have in the rotation. I don't know that he's a superstar. I don't think he really has that kind of talent level, but you need guys to just play roles and be good players. And I feel like that's what he is. He's a really solid player who can really help this team.
14 games for Maskell, started twice. Those were the
I
incidents where Miles Murphy did not start, finished the year with 22 tackles, including 2 for loss. The question is, can he take an extra step, kind of like Cornell Powell's senior year, like Ryan Carter's final year? Can he make that leap to be a real impact guy? Then you get into Xavier Thomas, who you really can't grade from 2022. That foot injury kept him off the field nearly all season. Played 3 games, only got 52 snaps. Of course, fans love to see him coming back next year, but it does seem that most of the Clemson family, on a personal level, they hate the reason why he has to be back.
Yeah, you wanted him to have such a good year that he would go to the NFL, and that just wasn't the case. And, he had the game at Boston College where he played pretty well, but that was it. And you just so unfortunate that he had that injury right before the season started and just really could not get healthy and then got hurt again. So hopefully he can be healthy, go through a solid spring here, and then be ready for the start of the season.
I think at this point, I can't help but bring in defensive ends coach Lemansky Hall as part of the conversation. When we talk about how these 4 guys have developed, Henry, Murphy, Maskell, Thomas, we're really only seeing giant improvements from the day they set on campus until they were able to get on the field. And you don't want to take for granted that Hall has a huge task in getting these guys to be functional college players, get them to make the transition from high school into not just any college team, but a system that really asks a lot of the defensive ends. It's a huge part of the job. Obviously, he knows more about it than media guys like me, certainly myself. But that's not the bar to clear when your program slogan is best is the standard. And let's apply that context. Murphy, kind of still who he was when he got playing time as a freshman. Maskell, some steps forward. XT, much the same. Great as a freshman, been very much the same since then. Henry certainly had a nice progression. But when I look back at why we're only talking about 2 guys coming back, and the fact that we don't know much about Cade Denoff or Zaire Patterson or Jaheim Lawson, I don't like saying it, but that track record of development just doesn't appear to be there since Cleveland Farrell and Austin Bryant headed to the NFL.
Yeah, it might be a little unfair to compare this group to that group, but that's what you do, right? That group set the standard. And I really think we need to start seeing something from Cade Denoff and Zaire Patterson. It feels like this is the year that they need to be part of the rotation. We need to start seeing something soon.
Be sure to check out our homepage, clemsonkickoff.com, for the full 2023 football schedule. It's got our archives of episodes as well and some other helpful links. Let's go ahead and talk about men's basketball. It was a rough week for the Tigers. We've talked about the disappointing loss to Boston College, Clemson then fell out of the AP rankings because they followed that loss with another to the hands of Miami.
Yeah, and deservedly so. I think they played well against Miami offensively, but they didn't play well defensively. And look, Miami, I think Miami probably has the best offensive team in the ACC. They might have the best team overall in the ACC. I know Virginia is really, really good, and I'm watching Virginia play right now, as a matter of fact, and they're really good. But Miami has a lot of weapons offensively, and Clemson just had no answer for it, Bill. And, this is a team that has been kind of built on that Clemson grit. We hear that all the time. But Brad Brownell kind of called his guys out after the game and said they need to show some of that. They need to show some toughness on defense. They need to show some toughness in the rebounding area. And those are the real two weaknesses for this team right now. And it seems like that all kind of came to a head against Miami on Saturday.
You mentioned Virginia's midweek game taking place as we record this on Tuesday night. The Tigers don't have a midweek game right now. They could lose their first place ACC spot before they take the court next.
Yeah, they could, but I do think it was probably a well-timed break for this team. They looked tired at times against Boston College and then against Miami. We know how banged up they've been with a bunch of guys being out or at least not being 100%. And I don't think anybody's 100% right now in the college basketball season, but Clemson was far from that these last couple of games. So maybe the week will help them get their legs under them and get ready for this stretch run. But Bill, I think they're in some trouble if they don't get some wins here coming up pretty quickly of probably being left out of the NCAA tournament. And that's almost impossible to think about after this team was sitting at 10-1 in the ACC.
Yep. Well, based on recent history of Clemson men's basketball, I guess it becomes a little more believable. But you're right, for this team,
yes,
for this team, absolutely. I'm just absolutely surprised at how fast it's gone downhill. I know they had some injuries for a stretch there. It seemed like they were making the adjustments they needed to make and figure things out and get their feet back under them. That apparently was a little too optimistic on my part, and I'm sorry if I'm jinxing the entire team. Obviously, they have had an uphill battle in several regards. They did need to make some adjustments. They may need to tweak that again. Saturday, they play at North Carolina. Clemson will look for its second win in program history at Chapel Hill. But more importantly, kind of like you're saying, they got to make sure the outlook for the postseason doesn't get any worse than that phrase, last four in.
Yeah, right now it looks like they're in based on all the projections and the bracketology, and I tweeted a couple of those out this afternoon from our Twitter feed. So, but this becomes a huge bubble game on Saturday against North Carolina. North Carolina got beat tonight by Wake Forest. They're in some trouble as well. So Clemson is squarely right there on the bubble. I don't think they're last four in yet, but if they lose this game Saturday, they might slip past the last four in and be out of the tournament just on these projections. And we all know their projections. They're not 100%, but they're pretty close. And these guys do that, and they know what they're doing for a reason because they've been doing it for a while, and they study all the numbers and everything that goes into it. And Clemson's getting dinged for its non-conference schedule, and it's getting dinged for some bad losses, and I think probably rightfully so.
The thing is, you really do root for these guys, and I know I'm throwing some humor out there because of years of the past, but these guys are working hard. Like PJ Hall has worked hard to get back healthy and get back on the court and find his top form. You know, Chase Hunter worked hard to get out there. I would imagine he's probably playing in a little bit of pain. He's been very effective, but I would imagine that night and the next morning, maybe it doesn't feel so good after the adrenaline wears off. Alec Hemingway has been trying to come back from injury and has gotten back on the court. Brevin Galloway, his injury is well chronicled. I'd just as soon not discuss the details of that injury, but you're glad to see him back out there. You're glad to see all these guys get back out there and fight and epitomize Clemson grit in that regard. And now you just want to see it show up in the results that they had been getting all year to this point. So good luck to the Tigers going up to North Carolina. The Tar Heels certainly are not their usual selves, so this is a good chance to get a win.
Yeah, it is. I think they can win this game. I don't think there's any doubt about that, but they've got to play offense like they played last Saturday, but then show something on defense. And you're right. Look, they're not coasting. These guys are working their butts off. There's no doubt about that. You can tell what this means to Chase Hunter and Hunter Tyson and PJ Hall and Brevin Galloway, and they've got to play better defensively than they did Saturday against Miami, or they could get beat pretty badly by North Carolina, because we all know how hard it is to go into Chapel Hill and win games. You know, it's going to be a big time environment on a Saturday afternoon up there. You know, some calls are going to go against you, so that you need to see some mental toughness from this team on Saturday afternoon. I don't think there's any doubt they can win the game, but they're going to have to put together a complete game to do it.
We'll keep an eye on that. We'll be retweeting news in between episodes after that game happens. Check us out at Clemson Kickoff, Twitter and Instagram. Thank you for being with us on youtube.com/Clemson Kickoff. Thanks for being with us on all the podcast apps. And until that next episode, I'm Bill Zimmerman.
I'm Daniel Shirley. Go Tigers.